Well, I thought I'd do something a little different this week. I've got a digital picture here that I did of a rose just a couple of weeks ago. And I thought I'd kind of walk you through the process so you can see how a digital painting actually comes about. I'm starting out with my reference up in the corner, and I'm just doing a rough sketch of the rose. At this point, I'm not trying to be really accurate in terms of just getting every single detail, but I'm using contour drawing, like I've described before, just looking at the rose and sketching out roughly the shapes that I see. And what I'm doing is laying down a sort of a guideline that I'm going to come back in a minute and go over in a little bit more detail. But right now, I just want to get the basic shapes down. And again, this is largely from doing what I've described before, blind contour drawing and modified contour drawing. As you practice that, then you can begin to draw literally what you see. Now I'm going back over it. I've actually added another layer in here, and I'm drawing on top of my original sketch. And this time I'm adding in more of the detail. I'm being a little bit more careful. And once I'm happy with that, then I begin the process of actually drawing the rose. Notice I changed the color of the background to a dark green. I will actually modify that background a little bit as we go on. But to describe the process of painting the rose from here on, you'll notice that I do it petal by petal. And there are a lot of different ways that you could do this, but I'm working in this picture for a very kind of a sharp look. The brushes that I'm using are airbrushes, again, digital airbrushes, but basically one has a hard edge and one has a soft edge. And that's pretty much all I'm using for this whole thing. What I do in this process that you're watching unfold here is for each petal, I add a new layer. And then I lay in a base color, and that usually is determined by whatever the general color of the petal is. If it's, like in this photo, if it's orange, then I will use the orange as my base. If it's yellow, I use the yellow as my base. But I lay in those colors, and then once I've colored in the petal and shaped it, and what I use to shape it is I use actually an eraser tool, digital eraser, and I will shape the edges of the petal until I'm happy with them. And then I turn on a feature that is present in virtually all good digital programs, and even, pretty much any digital program will have something called lock transparency. Sometimes it's called alpha lock. But what that does is when I turn on lock transparency, it means that section, that petal that is on its own layer, all I can color or draw on or adjust is that petal. If I color outside of it, then nothing shows up. So what that lets me do is that lets me work with a much greater degree of detail. And it lets me use the airbrush to add dimension, to add shadowing. And as you'll see here, I'm adding some brightness at first, and then I'm going through and I'm adding shadow underneath the little curled part of that petal. And then over on the side, I'm actually drawing another petal, and then I'm adding shadow underneath it. At times I will switch back between layers to add detail on different ones as I go. So here I've got the big outside petal. I'm laying in some nice, again, contrasting color, working some details. And in a digital program like this, I can shrink the size of the brush down to where it's just barely a tiny line. And so I can add in a lot of very fine detail. In fact, I could have added a lot more detail and texture than I did with this. But it's just a process of going layer by layer. Now, because of the program I was using and the limitations of my iPad, I had to keep combining my layers so I didn't use too many because it uses up too much memory, too many system resources. But now I'm working on the leaves and the stems, and you'll notice I've already put in the first, I don't know what you call those things, but the covers up the rose before it opens. And so I've drawn in one of those. Now I've come in with the stems. Both of those I've started with a dark underpainting or a dark base color. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to keep those fairly dark. And again, I've got lock transparency on right now. And so what I'm doing is I'm just using my airbrush tool to come in and lay in different colors and kind of build up the feel of a rose that's just about to open up. In the actual photo, there was another bud right in front of the rose, but I chose not to draw that one. Okay, now I'm adding the other one of those little things that opens up when the rose opens up. And again, you see I laid in the color, then I shaped it. And now I've got alpha lock on, and I'm coming in and adjusting the color, adding a little bit of shadow in, adding a little bit of fine detail. I don't make the detail in those quite as stark because I want people's eyes to go more to the rose, not to those. So I keep those a little bit less detailed. And so as I've moved back, as you can see now, these the stems. The stem and the other rose and the leaves those leaves are all on one layer. Now, what I've done is I've turned off, I haven't lost my rose picture, but I turned off that layer so that I could just focus on that first leaf. I wanted to experiment and draw with it without the distraction of the other. But, as you can see, I've now done the other one, coming in, and I'm going to very quickly draw in the other leaves, shape them the same way, and color them. And then I'm going to add a little texture to the background. And that's how you do a rose.